Um, Next, I really want to go through some of the core budgetary concerns, and I'm going to start with Abdul. He's going to talk about kind of something that Sarah just touched on, but like kind of this unrealized revenue. I saw a question about the red lights and that cash infusion that she mentioned. So I'm going to unmute Abdul and kind of give it over to him for a moment. Is it's not working for me. I'm trying to.
Yikes. All right. Yep, I got it.
Okay, you got it.
Thanks. Yeah, so good evening, y'all. I'm Abdul Osmanu, legislative councilman in the third district. So yeah, I'm more or less here to talk to you guys about like the harm of unrealized revenue, as well as cash infusions into our budget. So more or less, this is not like a new, unique issue to Hamden. That we are amidst. There have been past administrations, wrongfully so, that have notoriously put in false revenues or revenues that were rather a little overstated. And not seemingly in any rational way to actually be realized at any point. Why does this happen? I would say more simply that when you inflate your revenues, um, it gives the cosmetic it gives the cosmetic appearance that everything is fine, and that it more or less lowers the amount that you state you're going to raise the mill rate by. Whereas the bill and kind of numbers, the bill comes due and the numbers eventually do have to be made up. So that more or less is, I think there's some back. Okay. Yeah, so more or less like that actually contributes to the shortfall that we ended up creating for ourselves in previous years. And once upon a time, we've made that. I mean, once again, we've actually made that mistake, thus giving us, the 13 plus $1 million shortfall that we have. Where just as Councilwoman Gallagher said, we had the $8 million from our general fund that we decided to put in there against the wishes of the finance committee, and then also we had the $5 million from the red light cameras, which we knew we weren't. Well, not we, but at least seven council members were confident in that we weren't actually going to get those revenues. And as Councilwoman Gallagher referred to, by state statute, because the reason why we actually have the ability to put up red light cameras is that it was allowed by state statute. But by state statute, you cannot actually use that revenue for anything but expenses that you can deem related to transportation infrastructure, transit mobility, traffic calming, and anything in that realm. Which was why from the beginning I was very much against the idea of actually putting in this revenue. A, because it's volatile, which volatile in the fact that the expectation of $5 million wouldn't actually perennially stay at $5 million. Because if it follows any logic, people aren't going to continue driving in the habits that actually like lead them to get ticketed. So you would eventually see a plateau and then decline in the amount of revenue that you're seeing. Then alongside that, just like I said, the fact that you can't actually you can't use that in the same way that you use any other revenue that you reap from the town. So it's giving you an unrealistic perspective of how much our town is actually able to contribute in revenue. All of the which actually comes back to you as taxpayers, whether it's the town having to throw some extra money in the general fund or have to come back to ask you for taxes. So the way that I've always put it is, being more honest with our revenues in our budget allows us to be able to be more honest with you guys as taxpayers, and put ourselves on like a much better like path as a town to actually be in the position to actually like find our way through some of our fiscal issues. Because painting fiscal situations that don't actually exist has long been a problem here in this town, and is continuing to do so in this case. Where yes, why are we assuming $5 million when the cameras aren't up and running? That is the exact same question that I've had. Where in fact this is an issue that like myself, a Democrat, as well as Councilman Figler, who is a Republican, I recall actually like ardently arguing on the floor that it wasn't even a question of I ceded ground on the conversation of what you can actually use those revenues for. But like you said, we are in March. It is March 26th, and we just approved the contract as council. For which that doesn't mean that the construction of it is actually going to start now. There's actually a process by state statute that has to be followed. So for all we know, this might not actually even be up until July 1st. So in this coming budget, one of the things that I would really ask for folks to do is to just as much scrutiny as we're putting in terms of expenditures to put towards our revenues, because ultimately, though inflated revenues, might actually like lead to a lower mill rate, the bill for that eventually comes due, and leaves us no closer to digging our ways out of the situations that we find ourselves in right now. Um, where yeah, like creating shortfalls is not a great idea. Where in fact, for this current budget, I believe we have the same $5 million that is expected to be revenue from these red light cameras. Um, will they be up by July 1st? That would be the hope. But then it's also really truly the question of whether that $5 million is going to come. But as I said, that $5 million isn't guaranteed to stay $5 million. In future years. So you probably have a like shortfall that you're actually building in over the course of a couple of years. And then also, like I said, you really truly can't use it in the way that it's been budgeted for. So happy to answer like more questions in regard to that. But I think the more or less the MO of that is to really hold us accountable in terms of certain infusions of cash as well as revenue. Because ultimately, when we are overstating these things, we're doing you as taxpayers a disservice. Where yes, 5 million actually, $5 million would actually amount to, and I know Councilman Figler actually did the math, about 100,000 tickets actually given out. Where I am not sure how the $5 million was estimated. I think it was by like traffic studies. Where, for example, I know New Haven actually budgeted for about 700 or so $1,000 for revenue as well as expenses. And I am a proponent of changing that we can like changing that in the budget. I don't think the $5 million is actually like a great idea because, like I said, it's a shortfall. It's going to actually have to be paid for at some point or another. Where the thing that I am proposing is I would like to see the only revenue that is actually reflected in terms of red light cameras be the revenue that we know we are actually going to pay back the cost of setting it up, which the hope is, I believe I talked to Director White, the cost of setting all of this up is about $900,000. That is something that I do believe is actually going to be covered by the proceeds that we should be expecting from the red light cameras. But other than the cost of actually putting this up, I want to look at other things within the traffic department that we can actually consider as acceptable uses to actually include in that revenue as well as those expenses to make sure that the revenues related to the red light cameras and the expenses related to the to the red light cameras that are placed in the budget, figure themselves as net neutral and are as realistic and legitimate as we can place them to be. And then the rest of that, I actually have even proposed to council members having an off budget account where we actually have the opportunity to properly use the other red light camera money. Because, like I said earlier, you actually can't use this willy nilly. You can't throw it into the general fund. So, actually having a place to, an off budget account to actually have that, so council can actually approve like different measures related